Howdys and salutations, y'all. Hope you're having a fine Tuesday some time of the day, maybe Wednesday for a few folks. Hope it's good whenever you may be. I know that I may be a little low energy, but we're going to go into this anyway and try to keep it going. Where we left off last time, we'd been messing around with the Miquella piece, trying to get some of the details going, and realizing ultimately that, look, can we finish this as is? Potentially, it's not the worst, but the pose doesn't make any stinking sense still. Looking at it today, it's not as bad as I felt it was yesterday, so maybe some fresh eyes will change our mind. We can take a look at this and think it through, but, like, I feel like I can't tell what's happening with some of it. Maybe, maybe if we move this point a little further back, we can make it a more static standing pose. But, oh, yeah, there might be some ways to make that work. Foreshortening on the arm is still bad. I need to look up some references to maybe do that part in a more interesting way. And I have gathered a lot of references, actually. But yeah, actually, this is, looking at something with a fresh pair of eyes really does sort of get the mind moving again. So yeah, I'll be honest. I think the pose on this is bad. And as much as I'm tempted, both because of the pose and because of like the bizarre shape of this image, like the borders and like the comparatively low res canvas to the kind of stuff that I prefer to do of late, I had left last stream and come into this stream with basically the intention of not starting from scratch, but starting on a blank canvas, figuring out a more reasonable pose, and then to some extent starting from scratch, just using our existing stuff as reference. However, in the name of trying to not completely like restart this every time that I do it, and more so because I just looked at this and I realized, hey, wait just a second, this might be salvageable if we're a little bit clever with it. Yeah, let's try continuing the existing one first. I do think that we've still focused on detail slightly too soon, but we can work on that. The underlying structure is going to be a mess no matter what. I think I'm going to just accept that the underlying structure is probably not going to be great even in the final piece. That's okay, though. It's honestly okay. I think it'll be fine. Obviously, it won't be a perfect piece, but a finished Miquella drawing would be infinitely better than, you know, another 3 months of this. So I would love to be able to move on to drawing other things and other projects. Like, honestly, even some Baldur's Gate fan art would be fun. Pokemon has come out, and while the game is janky as all get out, it's still fun. There's so many other things we could be drawing, but I want to finish Miquella, so help me. As a reminder, it's because this one parallels the drawing we did much, much earlier in the year. Let's see if I can even find the darn thing. Yes, yeah, from January. Holy cow. We had this Miquella illustration. Now, catch on this one is we had a screenshot from the game, and we were using it as a direct reference, so it was not like original. Well, I mean, there's still a lot of original. We did stylizing, we still drew the whole darn thing. It's not like we traced it. But it was not like a completely original pose and piece in my mind, at least. I'm still really happy with it. We learned a ton of stuff. I'm thrilled with how it turned out. But we've learned a lot of things since then, including like ways to not have these resolution problems. It's still the best fur I've ever drawn along this coat. I'm really happy with that. The colors worked out very well. This was where we really started that grayscale color palette, which we've since refined. That process, like this was a major milestone in our progress of just drawing in general in digital art. And so I wanted Miquella to be a follow-up to that, but at that point I severely underestimated how difficult we would find posing and like the original of all of that, and it shouldn't have been that difficult. I overthought the whole mess. But it's left us with this, not this one, this one. Oh. Yeah. Changing the order. With the something of a mess, truthfully. But that doesn't have to be the end of the world. So, rather than going on to our new one, whoops, and starting fresh, let's do a little more thought on this. Because I have a bunch of images prepped to do post studies from Pinterest. By the way, I do have a Pinterest where we post all of our references that we use. We've got a folder for Miquella. I think it's public at this point. If not, it'll be public by the time this project ends. It's a wonderful resource. Some mood board stuff, but I tend to lean more towards very specific, like, concrete references, like getting poses, getting outfit pieces, stuff like that. I've got some inspiration-y stuff on there, but it really does depend sort of on the mood that I'm starting in, how much I lean into that. That said, as much as this is an interesting pose, there's two things that I think we can fix that will make it better? Maybe. I mean, at this point, the composition is just going to be whatever it is. But, oh man, because, look, way back in the day, we'd had the logic on this. I mean, way back in, like, V1, this is already V2, and it's months old. V1, we'd had a logic of this would be mostly a straight edge, and this would be a more dynamic bent edge, because, that gives interesting contrast to keep things lively. However, somehow this result has gotten very weird. We have, like, this one bent out, and I'm realizing that if we really want this to be a more ominous, more directly involving the viewer pose, an easy way to do that would actually be to straighten this edge out a bit. So we may end up inverting that. We have the cross here. may have the more imminent threat here. And we can even, if we do this, arc this up a little bit. It'll have a weird rhythm with the arm, but we'll figure out this arm once we get the rest of it sorted out. I literally have no idea whether or not that arm's going to look good until we're further into this. But rather than messing with the pose right away, I am actually going to, here, we can use this. We can use the V3 file for, yeah, warm-ups will do. Specifically some studies on this angle of arm. So I've got some references pulled up, and I want to try to catch this extreme vertical view, head angles, arm angles, and like chest angles. We can fix the legs and stuff a little bit, but I don't want to get in the nitty-gritty of that yet until we've got some of this other stuff worked out, at least in our heads. So, let's go back to this, well, let's jump into this larger canvas and work out a few proportions and odds and ends. Because one of the biggest issues with this arm is foreshortening, and it's not that it's inherently bad, but because the angle of the arm keeps changing every time we redraw it, because I haven't got the structure underlying it like we probably oughta, the foreshortening has been inconsistent. Like, the arm has ended up tiny, and then the weapon is immediately giant. That's not helpful. So, I've got an Adorka stock reference, because they're always great references for poses. Adorka stock's wonderful resource. Ton of stuff freely available online. They've got DeviantArt stuff, they've got Pinterest stuff. They've also got some paid packs. I haven't gone for any of those, but they look like they'd be pretty solid too. But I haven't needed to, because they have just so much available right out the gate. So, let's rough this in real quick first. Because I've found that I enjoy doing that. And this is just going to be the arm, for starters. Looking at this arm, we've got kind of a more vertical down and more over for that. But it's actually like the width for the top section is already wider than the length is going to be. We've got like kind of the muscle there. There's that, and then like you pretty much immediately, I'm going to do that. We'll get a very faint little eraser mark. Maybe not quite that faint. That'll do. And then we've immediately got the arm continuing, once again, not very far and not varying too much from the larger section. And it leans into the hand just right away, smoothly. And this one's an interesting grip because he's actually got a sword. So it's sort of just casually, and then you've got like hilt and blade. That part's not as important. And I've gotten some of the angle on this wrong, so let's have another go at it. Hey Galactic, yes, they definitely do. One of the things that's so fun about a lot of their work is they have like weapons and tools and implements and things. So they've got a whole collection that's just like staffs and like long stick holding. I think they've got some for canes. They've got lots of action ones for swords and stuff, but also just a lot of day-to-day poses. It's been a really nice resource all around. Yeah, they definitely got some good stuff for cane users. Okay, let me actually take like measurements of how this arm looks on the canvas. It is, wow. The length is only slightly double the width, the widest half, so about there. And then where's that landing on the full? About a third of the way down even, so it could be lower than that. That a little bit. Very slight arc in, very slight arc in. Wider. Hey, no worries. Multitasking is sort of just the way things go. That's the way of the world. I'm doing good. I was a little hesitant on this stream because I worried we'd have to do a little bit of rework on this, but I think we found another way to go about it. I'm excited for that. And in this case, you can see a little bit of their back behind the arm, and then like more of the shirt there, landing roughly behind the hand. Then like torso's over here, and so on. Not as concerned about that. But it's kind of useful to see relative positions. Yep, definitely trusting the process. But the challenge with this one is I'm picking up a really old piece, and so like I trust my process now, but I don't really trust my process from like 6 months ago. I've changed so many things since then. Like, oh, so it's been a lot of debate back and forth. I think we're gonna keep going on it for now. We'll see where it lands. Okay. They had like cross guard of the sword intersects there, and that one was basically coming straight down, continuing with the arm. There we go. Yeah, roughing stuff out like this is just it helps me think a lot. But now if we were to look at lines, we'll do like 50 for this canvas size. That'll be fine. May dunk these on the layer above it. So why not? Okay. Small curve in, and then I've got to be careful that I don't mix it up with just the shadows there. And it basically is just like a slight straightening out the angle of the arm and holding it. The hand, you've got like knuckles here. There. And then, let's see, these other ones. Shoulder joint kind of connects to the body. A little bit of pull there, as you typically do with fabric. He's actually got like a bit of visible muscle there, which is interesting. And it kind of connects to the lower arm. Smoothly though, not quite as like scratchy as that, and a little higher up. Let's something like that, really. Well, that, and then this part's a little lower. Yeah, it only really comes to this joint. So okay, relative proportions, sort of figuring this stuff out. There we go. And the wrist is actually here, and once again, I'm mixing up some of the behind-the-scenes shadow. There we go. Fortunately, this particular arm is in rather heavy shadow, which occasionally makes the reference a little bit harder to see. But like this gives me something to go off of for proportions and angles and such. Let's look at another one. No, I don't want you to add new ideas to my home feed. I want to continue on the thing I was looking at. Dagnabbit. Okay, hold on. I'm on Pinterest. I was actually like using that thing I was on. I did not want to return to home screen. Did not want to go to Pasco or collect $200. Okay, Miquella refs. I think this is public. Yeah. We got a lot of refs in here actually. Oh, that's an interesting. Okay, this arm's a little bent. That'll be an interesting one. Let's do that. Also, the reference is very dark. We're gonna not go all in on that because I won't be able to see anything. Okay. Trying to trust the angles. I'm looking at the reference more than my canvas. That way I am trying to draw what I actually see. That's usually a little more reliable, even though, not always, but usually. I like this one because it's got a lot of the fabric involved, although this is a stiffer fabric than what we would have been using for Miquella, or what we may still be using for Miquella. And the hand kind of emerges like this. And I'm going to go in a little more with something slightly more shadowy. Try to capture some of this a little bit. The whole back edge is also in shadow. There we go. Actual hand is fairly light, all things considered. Let's see, we can nab this and go just like a hair lighter for the admittedly limited highlights that exist. There's a little bit. And then kind of at like the top of that ridge. A little bit more of the darker, like underneath. And let's see. A little bit of the wrist there. Okay. Looking at the actual... Oh, I did that on the wrong layer. Oh, whatever. Looking at this, the main shapes are... Whoops, let's use a slightly smaller one to try to outline this with lines. We've got the arc at the top, which doesn't even make it all the way down to the bend. It's amazing how much I always try to oversize this top part, but when you've got foreshortening, it's like, eh. Ooh! Oh, it's always fun to get back to character redesigns. Jeevers, my character designs are still real slow though, so I don't redesign them too often. Still, I'd love to see it. And it's always good to have some idea of how you want the redesign to go. Like, in your, like, to sort of be thinking about that already, because you never know when that opportunity strikes where you're just like, oh, awesome, cool idea now, I want to jump on it. And you're like, wait, crud. I need to rework some things. No. Whereas those don't even look like they line up. This seems like it's closing in a void, and then this is like a separate line. I gotta choose less shadowy refs. Huh. That. I note that the hand really does arc more like that. Like hands have a lot of actually really interesting contrasting curves. I've learned that I do enjoy drawing them. They don't always turn out great, but they're really fascinating. No. Less curve there. There we go. And I guess just for a little bit of context, we can get like, whoops, I'm going to go back on the layer that we did the rest of it, go slightly larger brush for this part. Like, very little of the rest of this jacket is visible, it's just kind of like a side view. Let's see, and then just a tiny bit of the back as well. And at some point, a lot of those details just get lost in shadow. Let's look at another one. That one's more of a torso ref. We'll get to those in a second. I want to focus on this arm first so that we can do the arm first. Foreshortened arms are fascinating, but challenging. Let's see. That one's a drawn ref. I always feel bad just like, at least on streams, sketching directly from other people's like drawn references. Like, I always want to jump in and do more of a, like I'm going to draw directly from people, at least, for this stuff. Practice, of course, no holds barred. But for streaming, since it's kind of public, I'm like, I want to stick to slightly more original stuff. Let's see, stuck in base sketch, since I wasn't too sure about the pose, starting to think might be a cane user. Yeah, no, I definitely feel the pose. I feel like posing is harder than line work for me. Finding a pose that I'm confident with and like settling on it takes me so long because I'm just like, well, does this really capture the character though? Or like I start it and I'm like, wait, crud, this isn't actually like physically possible and it looks really janky now. That's often the case. But yeah, no, a cane users, that's a fun one. Really good for silhouette design too. Gives them a little character, something that stands out. But it also definitely changes the entire like pose ideas, because like when you're distributing a lot of your weight onto the cane, Like, it's completely different from standing fully on your feet. I know that less from art and more from just, like, experience. Not that I used a cane for very long. I found the wheelchairs to be easier back in the day. Ah, good times. Let's see. Okay, this one's like a slightly slimmer arm and a slightly less extreme angle. I'm not too worried about like the actual hand for this particular reference. Let's see. No, more down and out. There we go. That immediately looks less painful. You can add a little shading, but there's really not a ton on this one, and that's really intense shading. What am I doing? Not that it matters too much for this, but you know. A little there, and then a little following the thumb itself. You've got the light like right on the edge. Again, if we split out these fingers, that light would be on each of them, but we aren't splitting out those fingers, so it's not. Truthfully, if I'm going at it with the lines and the smaller brush, coming at it here in a second. Let's see. Trying to get something more like that, although this one needs to be much more faint than that is. From here you've got like kind of where it runs into the body, an outward curve, and then a more gentle curve in that kind of gets eaten by the wrist. And then again, not too worried about the rest of this actually looking like a hand. Let's see, trying to figure out where that's landing proportional with the body. Okay, and then up to the neck, the outfit along there. Okay, yeah. The torso kind of continues over and so on. Yeah. Trying to keep it unique to the characters, but since they were raised in the lab, sort of robotic. Stasis pod. Yeah, yep, definitely. Definitely makes sense that'd be something that even just purely taking time and letting muscles sort of recover for that. Stasis pod or no, that's going to be a rough one to try to regroup from. Let's see. Take a little time to get back used to walking. Let's see. Okay. Okay, smooth that out a little bit. And then truthfully, this should probably be a little more narrow all in all. Okay. That didn't, whoops, I forgot how big the eraser is now. I always have my eraser just slightly the wrong size. That's okay. Okay. Feeling like we're starting to get some useful arm references. Why don't we do one more? I know, like, rule of threes and whatever, but if I got one more that I can work with, we may as well. No, that one's not really at a good angle for it. This one a good angle for it? Yeah, that'll do, actually. Kind of a middling gray. Go back to our larger brush, and we'll get back in here. And this one I'm kind of just going for the whole rhythm of the arm at this point, because it's very much, it's less angular, more obscured. Somewhat smoothed by the flow of this particular, like, looser cardigan outfit they've got going on. But very basic. Gonna have to add some lines for that to make sense, probably. Although, to some extent, if I just go ahead and get the rest of the outfit, it'll help a little. So let's see, that kind of runs there. Well, it arcs more like that, and then there's a bit of a gap, waistline. got like ants that are sort of obscuring some of this. The belt line. Yeah. A little bit. Leave kind of connecting in. And then if we were to do like a little bit of line work on it, it really almost has like a corduroy pattern to it. Let's see, but it's definitely the out and then a contrast curve in there, even though we don't see like the actual like angle on the inside of the elbow, it still affects the silhouette a bit. In and then like flare out. Point where like the view underneath kind of obscures it. Yeah, there we go. And then sort of separately from that, you've got the actual hand. Knuckle there, more knuckles kind of down. Finger there, more fingers. And thumb. I need to make the fingers longer. That's okay. And again, semi-obscured by just the other elements of clothing. This has more of an arc in than I really caught with the silhouette, but that's okay, because most of this area is lost in shadow. Oh, okay. I'm not sure this one was as enlightening as the others. It's pretty heavily obscured just by this kind of corduroy pattern that runs through the whole thing. I'm not going to be able to capture with lines if I'm just doing a slapshot job like that. Meh. We're not worrying about texture right now. But I do think this has been very helpful for figuring out some of the forms and some of the angles that one would hold an arm at. So looking back at Miquella, let's actually think about this. Oh, jeepers, this is such an incredible mess of layers. New L arm. Technically the right arm, but from our point of reference, it's the one on the left. Got something of a shoulder. If we were to actually look at our references here, most of these from this angle aren't like holding it in wild poses. But most of them also... Well, let's just think about the angle first. Holding it all the way back there feels like kind of wild. Like you ought to be poised for something, but it also feels like it makes this chotel, I suppose is the word, just the wrong size. Like it should be further away. If it's actually in that hand, it should be like that. But we want the exaggerated foreshortening, so we need a pose that's going to put it closer to the viewer. One option for that would be to have it aimed more directly at the viewer. Let's say that gives us useful reference points along the hip, as usual. And then we could easily fit it in there, and it won't be as massive, but it'll be basically, you know, at us. However, even that angle looks kind of passive. So as an alternative, we could also have it where he's got it more directly pointed. Holding it slightly different angle once again. It's almost like a harvesting kind of thing. I don't know. Have the art against us. Don't really think that works either. Let's see, there was one. Let's think about this one. It's still leaned out a little bit. It puts the hand at kind of an interesting point here. Gives a good opportunity. And let's see, if it's gripping like that, that would put the chotel something like this. Which we could definitely exaggerate to keep it interesting. And to really like catch the viewer's eye on that is the most threatening part of this. Especially because it's got like that flame eclipse pattern on the outside. You don't need that part. Good enough. Now, trying to imagine that without the other arm, it does make it a slightly more stoic pose, which is honestly, we didn't necessarily want a ton of motion in this pose. The tension is supposed to be that it's holding right before the moment. So what we could do that would change this a little bit too is change the angle of the torso so that it's facing the viewer a little more, just a little bit more, and of the head as well. So if we've got that going on, then it'll bring the focus into a little more clarity. And we'll probably have to put that arm away, but that's okay. Let's see. Which layer is that on anyway? Line work? Okay, yeah. I actually want to do that anyway, just because it's a good arm, and it might be the one we want later. But it's kind of distracting right now, so I'd like to put it on its own layer. Let's see. Right arm. Apologies, future me, for the terrible layer naming conventions. Let's actually do the same thing for this one. Just so that we've got a little something easier to work with our eyes. L arm. So working with just this, we can do some quick sketches. We'll use this layer for now. No, it'd have to be even like partially obscured. Unless we adjust the torso a little bit. Let's see. We can, of course, stick with what we had. Oops, nope. We can have like a clenched fist. That doesn't seem like it'd be a situation where he's necessarily angry. Unless he was like clutching onto something important. An emblem or something. Even then, that composition's not amazing. But it's something to work with. There's, of course, also the option of truthfully just having the arm behind the back. Because I feel like having it just casually at the side on that one would also be like too undynamic. Like, it needs to be like, it shouldn't be like hooray or like look over there, look at that. Not the trying to do like a hand with like pointing. Yay. And on hip again doesn't seem quite right. And holding something, maybe like a written ritual or another important element, seems more interesting to me. We could figure out what would go in the hand later, but we also don't want it to distract from what is supposed to be the much more threatening focal point. We can mess with the overall arc of the Shotel a little bit there. Really have like some fun, intentional, like warped perspective with it. Really lean into that look. Keep that in a nice place as far as like rule of thirds goes. If that was a terrible line work of rule of thirds, but this is actually not a terrible position for that, which is good. Having the focal point there would be good. Do some interesting stuff with that, or we could just keep it in the darkness. We'll figure out background later and shading later. If we want to have like a grand window or something back there, we could. I feel like that messes with the angle and looks weird angular unless like Miquella is somewhat framed by it too. And if any of those things are the case, we'll deal with background when we deal with background. The point is, I think this is a good dramatic angle for the Shotel, a dramatic angle for this arm, which isn't overly extreme. It also means that this becomes our contrast, which is kind of cool. So the next thing I want to do, and we're going to want to go back to the other project for this, really. Let's do these arms. Is I want to look at the torso a little more. Torso. And I never plan these layers out amazingly well, so we're not going to bother labeling separate layers and then inevitably not using them when we're just doing sketchy stuff like this. Okay. Foreshortened torso with this angle. Let's see. Okay, good option here. We can hide the arm ones. Once again, getting our fairly big brush, just because that makes it easier to work with. And let's look at this one. This is actually one of the ones that we got one of the arm refs from too. Whoa, that line feels weirdly small. Maybe I need to zoom in more, or just press down more. That'll do. There's sort of our angle at the top. Let's see, comparing lengths real quick. I'm going to assume no arm attached there. Not that. Wow, this really is like fairly long. And then similar length. Bit of the squash and stretch going on there. This lands roughly under that shoulder. Yeah, okay. So I'll get some lighting and texture on this in a second. We'll get our silhouette shape first, and then I'll do the borders, and then I'll see if I can map the actual angles in a way that makes sense in my head. Our template a little bit. Not that the angles have to fit the template, but you know, if we're trying to understand the logic behind them, it's useful to understand what the template is trying to represent. So, okay. Whoops. Oh yeah, all in the same layer. So should be careful with that. Okay. Leg connection, but not quite that whole leg. And that one shouldn't go up as high. Lands more like our actual sketch, really. A little bit lower. There's kind of like that angle there. Top of the torso here. And we've got kind of like a curve going in there, or it could be more flat. Let's see, one arm is literally like that. The other one, you've got kind of the shoulder, and it's coming down. Legs connecting like this, one exiting there. And this one actually... Okay, the joint's kind of pushed forward too from this pose. It's more here. This one really is a little more angled back, looking at the whole leg. So seeing this, and trying to map sort of the templatiness that we've been doing, you've got kind of the Among Us shape. Oh, hey, May, how are you doing? Things been going well since Art Fight, hopefully? Or at least better than they were? Let's see. I'm just working out poses for a new drawing, or a really old drawing that I need to fix the poses on, actually. Ah, that's fair, that's fair. Head is ending up sort of over there. Yeah, no worries on participating or not. It was a hectic month, to say the least. And alas, Team Vampire did not win, which was, I mean, kind of a given from the start, but nevertheless, it was fun. Yeah, okay, let's see. That's one angle. We want an angle where they're looking, like, leaning a little... Oh, hold on. Let's do one that's more of a side view. And then we'll do one that is more leaning over. It was a good fight. And it's certainly, like, winning or losing doesn't change whether or not it's fun. At least not for me. I am not heavily invested in points. At all. I do so much friendly fire in that game, which is just the worst for points. It's like, it means you only get like 20% points for those. Like, the friendly fire penalty is really harsh. Which, again, you know, they're trying to make it a competitive thing. It makes sense, but... Wait, hold on. So that ends up being fairly vertical. Or not vertical, but not, like, level. Like, arced down pretty far. Yep, pants. Not, like, flush with the edge, because that's not really how pants work. That way, got one hip joint, leg coming there. The leg is mostly obscured behind it. This one has the arm coming straight down in line with that leg. The other arm is basically obscured. Just got like a hand visible there, the arm going up. But, like, that shoulder isn't even visible behind the torso. And like the heads. Oh, hold on. That's a little off. Let's see, losing that. The head is more like this. Okay, yeah, there we go. More like that. A big fluffy beard, actually, so... What more happening there? Shouldn't really be getting caught up in, like, head details, but that's fine, that's whatever. Anyway, point is their torso. Yeah, an art fight, as always. I feel like I got a lot out of it. I improved a lot. And I learned some new techniques, which makes it fun to go back to these old pieces. I mean, also makes it awful to go back to these old pieces. Because I'm like, oh no, look what I was doing, but fun too. Let's see. And let's get a more leaned over torso. One where their focus really is, like, on the person that they're leaning over. Not leaned back. That one's leaned back. Well, I guess the thing is you don't really have to lean forward notably to get that imposing look. Most of the references I see where there's an imposing figure, they're not even bothering to lean down, because that'd bring them closer. And whereas keeping some distance is actually, like, more threatening. Let's see. This'll do, though. We can start with this. Let me add it to my references, because it's one of the recommended ones. I don't know why there's so many stock photos of, like, businessmen stepping on the camera, like, aggressively. Like, I'm sure they're representative of, like, the corporate ladder and, like, crushing people below your feet or some nonsense, but it's, like, a really weird series of stock photos. Guys, maybe chill out a little. Whoa, I am on the wrong brush. That's a pretty brush, though. The airbrush stuff, yeah. Need to dig into that more. So we got one angle there, which, hold on. Looking at actual reference, my brain always wants to put it, like, relative to the person. No, I'm looking at, like, actual relative to the canvas. Down a little bit. This one's like this. Guess that arcs up a tiny bit. No, don't draw the suit jacket. Sleeve. Leg, because anger. Oh wait, hold on. No. Remember the scale I'm working on. I've made this one much too big, but that's okay. Keep these arcing out. There is leg from, again, the whole stepping thing. Don't know what the deal is with that. It's got like a tie, and that can be, well, normally not relevant to this. It's kind of a useful indicator of gravity sometimes. It's not one of these ties. It's like the wide bottom ones, but whatever. Because the actual button line is different. Belt is there. This one's a lot more freeform. We've got that leg. Then this leg actually in reality is going that way to balance it a little bit. Got an arm up here, just like in an angry fist. This is a ridiculous stock photo. Huh, interesting. That's kind of fun. In any case. Okay, so that's some ideas on the torsos. So looking at this one, I mean, I can tell you which one it's most in line with, and that's the one that's, it's this one right here, where they're kind of standing up tall, as opposed to leaning over, and then it's just their head that leans down to look, which honestly would be closer to our original pose. I think that'd be perfectly reasonable. It'd be changing less, which would be good. I'm going to call this one new torso. And honestly, I don't think this one's actually going to change that much. I just need to figure out the positioning on it. Once again, let's look at our reference here. This is even arced more. We could almost have them stand up straighter, really. If we wanted to. And that gives a belt something more like that. Need to make these lines a little more faint because they're not they're just okay. Yep. There's that. That could get that arm an interesting slope. And then we can still have the hips kind of. I don't know what the hips are doing in this one because they're not level to the ground in a way that makes sense. It still looks like they're walking. And we could at least move that focal point there so that the sort of center line like that. One leg down, one leg. I mean, again, in this particular reference, they're fairly straight. In this one, they're more dramatic. We could kind of, but that involves the hips being leaned forwards and the torso more back as a result. Torso's leaned forward, so we kind of need the legs to do the same, truthfully, to balance that weight because you want that to be believable. You have one that's a little more forward, perhaps one that's a little more vertical. But let's see. In any case, May, it's good to see you. Glad to see you're out and about on Twitch again. And in the meantime, I'm going to just... That hips ended up a little exaggeratedly wide, but that's okay. Keep working on this. That torso's really big, and Miquella is still technically child, so we'll have to tone that down a bit. Even do Neo new torso. This project's such a mess. That's okay though. A little bit of arc, a little bit. We'll keep this a lot more tame in size. Let's see. I mean, drawing a center line through this. Like, kind of feels like it arcs like that almost. Like up to the head. Nope, nope. Like a smoother edge over there, which is kind of what we were getting at in the original one. And again, underlying Among Us in this, nothing crazy. Sorry, that's just like that's how I draw rib cages. It's not supposed to be Among Us, but it looks like Among Us, and so now it is. Okay. The biggest thing with the hips is they don't need to be much wider than the rib cage, because again, child proportions, but they do need to be arcing upwards like that, not downwards. Which was sort of the biggest source of, or one of the two biggest sources of pain that we were having. The other one, for the record, is the rotation of said hips, because they're not at an angle that makes any stinking sense. Right now, anyway. Look back at my hip shape reference guide. That's not perfect, but it'll do. And if we think about it that way, then almost a motion. What if we go for something more like this Izetta pose? Where it's okay, yeah, that's good for the foreshortening too. Have one leg actually coming this way. But it does mean that this other leg probably needs to be aimed slightly more forward. Not like crazy more forward, but from this perspective, at least like closer to straight down. And a reminder, we're not going to see the bottom of it. We're getting into like crazy foreshortening territory with knees and such here. So even then the hip section could probably be larger. Okay, cool. I feel like we're getting into a good groove with this now. Even though the piece looks, I'm sure, like from an external view, worse than it did yesterday by miles, I'm feeling much more confident in it. This leg still doesn't feel right. I want to make sure I get that right. You could have it further back, but that just looks like he's leaning forward like a Gmod animation, where they just bend it however. We could have it split, or like even stepping forward. That implies that he's stepping on top of the viewer, which I don't like. Doesn't really fit the scene. That would sort of give us a little bit of an angle in the hip. You had one bent, like it was stepped up a hair. Don't hate that. It's like the focal point of the hip slightly more over there, which is good. The other one kind of there. If I had most everything else non-visible, I was just looking at these. This leg is still not satisfying, truth be told. I was looking at the balance on this. I would expect one straight down, and it's just that the knee would be angled sort of like that relative to the camera, mayhaps. Leg positions, again, they're important for the balance of the piece and for the fabric flow. That's sort of why I'm bothering with them right now. Let's see. We've got this slightly more casual. That's going to parallel nicely, actually. That'll be good because it'll contrast the show-tell very clearly. Other hand can be out of view if we want, or it can be, as we discussed earlier, like reading something or clutching something tightly. So all that's really left are the head and this other leg. And the head, I think we've got interesting options for. Because we had done a lot of sort of three-quarter view because I was afraid of drawing a head head-on, and I still am a little bit, but I'm much more confident than I was before Art Fight. You can have like a little bit, just like the tiniest bit off. The curve slightly away, looking at the hand, or perhaps where the show tail is going to hit. But we do want to be the focal point of this, given that this is an image where the viewer should be feeling a sense of being in danger. I feel like that's going to carry through fairly well with this part, at least. That's it. You know, the other thing we could do to close this frame is this could be where we put other General Dude. Much, much fainter and vertically subordinate to Miquella, but looking in as well, we'll just have like faint silhouette there. He's much less important though. And he'll be very much faded to the background. Let's chuck him somewhere else. Forgotten his name already, and I feel bad about that. It's O'Neill, Commander O'Neill, or Neil. One of the two. Okay. Also looking over us, we'll probably want a different angle for him, but it's there, just as a hint. And that would give us an interesting opportunity to put a window, something. It'd have to need much more foreshortening than that, though, given how intense the foreshortening angles that we're going for are. Like almost that, even. If we wanted the ominous, like, apocalypse thing. But again, that's more background stuff. The Joys of Elden Ring. Funky, funky game it is. To make that layer super faint. Because it's not the priority. The priority right now is where does the other leg go? The answer to that I'm feeling is on the correct layer for one thing. A little bit stanced up. Like this one's definitely going to be sort of obscuring it. And again, the whole thing's going to be under the fabric. But I think that's reasonable enough. Get good fabric flow from that. This is turning into a little bit of a mess of lines. Just fine. Okay. Feeling good about this pose now. Something that I've literally never actually thought about this piece. So that's an improvement. More reworking. I'll label this. More reworking. That's good enough. And with that, I am actually going to take a restroom break real quick. This is a good stopping point. But we will be back in just a few minutes, and we will continue on this. I hope to see y'all in just a moment. Howdy, y'all! I gotta say, I am horribly disappointed to realize that I have been muted for the past hour. I've been on such a roll and such high energy this stream, dagnabbit. Ah well, is what it is. Basically, Jeepers, was I even muted while we were doing like all of these? And I was talking about we talked about a Dorcas stock and the Among Us chest shape, because it's a useful ribcage tool that I learned about before Among Us. This explains why no one mentioned that there were a lot of refs. We're going to do a recap on this, so help me. We hit a lot of topics. Let's see how many we can remember. Let's actually, before we do the torsos, let's look at the arms. We did those first. I think we were still talking about those pre-stream. We had the Adorka stock ones. A couple of different useful angles here. This is the one that we've ended up using as a reference the most because it's sleeveless, and so we can get the muscle patterns pretty easily. Looking at the torsos, however, we had a few. Once again, I've got all these on the Pinterest, so if you're ever interested in the references we use, they're available. This one was a Dorcas stock. It's been really handy. The head angle and like the sort of smooth edge of the shoulder not even being visible, hiding the other arm, has been very useful and interesting. And I like this. I like the arm inner angle a little bit, but I like the other angle more. Sort of sets it off better. And this one is Pinterest, and I guess stock images in general. There's a weird number where it's just a businessman stepping on whoever's like the camera. I guess it's like corporate competition or what have you. Anyway, weird. Don't know why so many. Useful for leaning over pose, which is one we considered. I only even included the tie because it was a helpful indicator of gravity as opposed to like the pose, so it helps orient. We ultimately didn't end up going with this one too much. Still, glad that we did these. These were an excellent warm-up, and I'm feeling so much more confident with the pose that we've been ending up with here. Let's see. Oh, we've got so much stuff happening in this one. The sketch layer, but okay, we had new torso. Not that line work. New left arm. Okay, man, we missed out on so much thought process. Okay, recapping the thought process. New torso. You can see this fainter one back here. And you can sort of see, here we'll hide background captain. Let's hide the actual like, alright, so that's all in this folder. Oh, okay, that's all new torso. Okay, one thing at a time. We had our old, was it the pose discovery that we've been sort of working off of? No, not that one. Well anyway. What we ended up doing with this arm was keeping it largely parallel to the body. I can at least show the neo torso of where we sort of ended up. I like keeping this arm parallel to the body. It keeps a nice smooth rhythm on this side. That way we can have the contrast of the spike being more directly in the viewer. I wanted really intense, like in the face with this, more so than we had with the old sketches. Even dropping off the screen out of sight a little bit to almost imply like it's like under your nose or chin. Like the point is that this particular piece is supposed to be Miquella being a fairly threatening figure. The viewer is in danger from being near Miquella in this one. It's kind of the whole fun deal. Keeps it exciting. And so putting this show-tell right in view with really intense foreshortening up to the arm and then so on leans into that even more than what we had done before. It's got like a nice eclipse pattern on the outside of it. It's a very cool weapon. It also rule of thirds nicely with the point, so you get some good attention drawn to that. We may get a little bit of that with the face too, but those will sort of be the best two options there. But keeping the arm parallel here means that, like with the body form here, means that this will be much more of a focal point. So I'm liking that. We'd also experimented a bit with this arm, trying to figure out how it would be relative to the rest of the body. Went back and forth over a few ideas, but ultimately, since we want the silhouette to cause more focus on the point, I didn't want this arm to be jutting out as well, so we're actually going to have it like overlapping the body to take it out of the silhouette, but still keep it as part of the piece. We'll figure out what he's holding. There's a few things that could be symbolically significant for Miquella through Elden Ring lore. Lots of options, actually. Maybe a Trina's Lily, maybe a Comet Shard, or Comet Piece, or no, it's a Comet Shard, I think. Anyway, could be one of the symbolic items of either the Golden Order, something of his parents, or of his Halig Tree, and the various things going on there. Maybe even something from his sister, who knows. But really, what would be wise would be to do something from... okay, hold on, which one is it? Not Radon, not Radigan, not... It's one of the G ones, not Godwin, Godric, Godson. No. Godwin the Grafted, lame. Godric the Golden. Was it Godric the? No. No, it's Godric the Grafted and Godwin and Godoroch. Whichever one the middle son is, like not the king, not the one you actually fight, not Horalu. His kid who died first. I guess Godwin. Yeah, because it's Godfrey, Godwin, Godric. Okay, Godwin. Yeah, that one. Something significant to that, because it looks like Godwin and like Miquella and Melania were like actually a happy sibling trio, got along well. Funny how that works. Anyway, we'll figure out something there. Because this whole potential ritual, at least the current theory on the lore, is that this may have been an attempt to bring him back to life, with mixed results. And by mixed results, I mean 0 success and a lot of ghosts, so that's probably bad. Anyway, that's what we're keeping up with that with this hand. As far as the pose itself, we did look through. We've got, okay, yeah, we can actually look at new torso here first. We looked at the torso first, and I based it heavily off of this one, but also off of our original sketch here, which, well, some of the earlier sketches, which had this like leaning back more rather than just straight leaning forward. This one, while I liked the pose a lot, Miquella is still like kind of child-ish in appearance, and so we're going for like a softer, more narrow one in the actual torso we've gone with, which you can kind of, like even seeing them overlaid, you can see that. I've also gone for less exaggeration in the hip pose because it's supposed to be a more static pose. This isn't supposed to be the most dynamic. Like, the dynamic comes from the implied threat and from the intense angle. It doesn't necessarily come from motion happening at this moment. The intensity isn't from movement. So I don't want the pose to be, like, wildly chaotic. The other thing is, it took a while to get the legs into an angle that I think makes sense. You'll probably saw me experimenting with those, trying to find something that looks like it would actually hold the weight of this form. So once we figured out where the arms were, and the foreshortening and all of that, and like how the torso was going to angle, and how the hips were going to angle, because we'd had the center line way too close to the center, the hips should not really be facing us directly. Like, we don't want them facing the camera, we want them facing further to the right. So we had to do some shifting with that. That's why this has... and also, the other thing with the hips is that they were pointed too far down in that original sketch. We had the belt angled, like, way wrong for perspective. I don't know how I messed that up so repeatedly. It needs to arc upwards. If we're below it, that's just how horizon lines work. So we got that sorted out. We figured out legs that are actually based on Izetta, the reference we had over here earlier from Art Fight. I liked the pose we did there, so I took some inspiration from it. It's not one-to-one, but it gives us a fairly stable stance that isn't like an over-the-top wild motion one. And then with the cloak covering it and sort of flaring off, we'll be able to build on that. And then the face. We'd done a lot of faces, like shifting to 3/4 views, because frankly, I wanted to put detail in the face, and I was afraid of even attempting a head-on one. Art Fight, I've gotten so much face practice from that. It's been wonderful. I feel like I know roughly where to start with that. But also, I found a tutorial like earlier this week from Love Life Drawing. At first, I thought it was one of those like live, laugh, love things, but it's specifically like love life drawing, like drawing from life. And I've been getting a lot back into sketching in like physical sketchbooks lately. Anyway, it's been a lot of fun. I used to like go out to the local parks and stuff and do that, but the weather here is hot garbo now, literally. So I can either wake up stupid early on a weekend to go do that, which is not super tempting, or I can die of heat stroke, which is also not super tempting. So I've been finding other things to sketch, like my old Warhammer collection. But Love Life Drawing just put out a video this week that's like on head shapes, and they do such a good job of not just reiterating existing templates, but like explaining what's important in like all of the existing techniques. Like you talk about Loomis heads and the stuff Proco does and all of those. There's a million tutorials on heads online. I like Love Life Drawing stuff because they explain what's important on it, and then they oftentimes help simplify or come up with systems that emphasize what's useful for beginners as opposed to what's useful in like a broad spectrum. Like they did a one recently-ish about like lines of action, which can be beneficial, but they were they matched my experience, and what I found a lot of people's experience is early on, when you don't know muscle structure or the other masses very well, the line of action actually makes stuff more stiff because you do it, and even if it's a real dynamic curve, you basically just like hang all of the other pieces off of the line, which isn't really what they're supposed to do. It's not how they help. But until you've got the other stuff down, the line of action isn't really useful. Like, it's definitely, like, later on it can be beneficial, but early days it's a hindrance. It's almost like putting up like just a metal bar, and then all of the other pieces are just magnets you end up sticking to it as a beginner, because I don't know how the other pieces should interact with each other as well as the line of action. So I always found, especially when I was starting, but even to a fair extent now, that I would get the line of action, and then I would get some pieces on there, and either I would map them directly to it and the finished drawing would look terrible, or I would end up shifting them around so much that it seemed like the line of action had nothing to do with the pose at all anymore. So it was nice to hear someone explain sort of why that was happening, and like where to focus energy early on that was more useful, and how to appreciate the line of action when you get to it. Same thing with gesture drawing. It's useful, but I feel like it's a bad place to start. Because everyone talks about, oh, you need gesture drawing or your art will be stiff. And it's like, okay, yes, but you don't need to do that in the order of learning. That's just the order of like drawing a specific piece. So if you're just trying to learn to draw, gesture drawing is like super esoteric and like not very concrete or easy to teach compared to some of the other things, like bone structure and like body masses and stuff. And it's not super easy to draw or capture with your eye until you understand that other stuff. So starting with gesture always feels, at least to me, like a really high barrier to entry, and the very first art tutorial that ever clicked with me didn't start with gesture, and I think that's why it clicked with me. It got to it later, but you don't have to start with gesture in your learning. It's just when you finally get to the point where you feel ready for it and ready to incorporate it, you start with gesture on that specific drawing. You can still learn other skills first. You won't become a stiff artist permanently because you didn't learn gesture first. Which was sort of the mindset that I had gotten from all of the other tutorials I'd seen, minus that first one. So I really love life drawing. They've got a lot of cool resources. But we're going to try, specifically this head tutorial, I appreciate the confidence they've given me, and I'm going to try to follow its structure. That's the one that I used in like the actual sketch we've got here. Because it's got the Loomis head concept and the shape, it's got the circle and the angling and stuff, and a really useful technique for how to angle the circle. Which was actually drawing the full arc for those cross lines, as opposed to just trying to draw the cross lines. It makes it much easier to tell if they're mapped to the orb correctly. But we tried their technique for this face, which gets a better sense of like the eye ridge and all. And I'm going to have a go at an almost head-on view because it's more dynamic for this piece. Again, the intensity is in the pause here. It's not in the motion. It's in this immediate situation where, yes, the blade is the threat, but Miquella is also the threat. And you are the target of this threat's focus. You don't want them looking away somewhere. That totally distracts. Like, they don't seem threatening anymore if they're distracted. Like, you want the intention to be on the viewer. So we're going to actually try to do that. Let's see if we can put away the new arm. We've got the the Neo New torso, which we did for just like a rough. Which I'm feeling. I know I've said this before, but like I've always been kind of shaky on how this piece was going. Nothing ever felt quite right with techniques, and there's still, I won't deny, a little bit of shakiness with this one, but I feel so much more confident on this. I think it still captures the same pose, so we won't have to do a whole lot of like brand new thinking compared to some of the stuff. We can still reuse a lot of the concepts and ideas and like stuff we figured out last time. But this proportions make sense. It's already like, even just this quick sketch makes more sense in my head and looks better. We may still have to work on the tilt of the shoulder a little bit and like the chest here, but it's still like really good. This hand needs a little work. This hand, I'd spent a lot of time, I actually had to pull out a foam sword and like grip it myself, and was using my hand as a reference for this to get the angle of the fingers. And then of course we've got like this exaggerated foreshortening on the blade because I want it to be right up in your face and right up in this like rule of thirds. It's a little bit low. We'll see how that goes. Finally, the last thing we were looking at, man, I'm glad I took that restroom break, or I wouldn't have noticed, and this would have just ended as a dead silent stream with no explanation. Good opportunity for a recap. We'll see on some of the fabric folds. I like this underfold. These over ones feel a little too cartooned. We'll come back to it. But that arm, using the references that we had on this, I actually like came back to these arms and like this one specifically. And man, having an actual reference for arms makes it easier to draw arms. Who'd have thunk? So I think we've got the shape much better here because yes, the way that arms sort of taper from one end to the other is generally consistent from all views, but the actual like shape of it and silhouette changes so much from every angle. So having a reference there was extremely helpful. I just don't think Miquella is actually all that toned because again, kind of a child character. Then finally, the last thing we were working on, and the last thing I'll recap here. Thanks to anyone who stuck around or anyone who skipped to the end. Sorry about this confusion. Hey, you'd think silly technical mistake on my part. Sorry about that. But the last thing we were looking at was the hair. And the reason this is significant is that you saw me going through different refs earlier too, as well, most likely. Early on hair, not too braided, not horribly long. But as you get later in life, especially with this one, his kidnapping by Moog, the braids get longer. And there's a current working theory through Vati and Zuli the Witch and a few others. I don't know if Zuli was part of this particular one, but Zuli's a great resource in general for Elden Ring lore. Wonderful stuff. Done some videos on skeletons recently. Anyway, talking about since Miquella doesn't visually age, because they've got a sort of dynamic with him and his sister Melania, they're twins, and they've ended up as sort of embodiments of Miquella. Is this? It's not eternal youth. It's like eternal like blossoming and growth, as opposed to Melania's eternal rot and decay. Like they're not at the start. It's not like life and death, or like young and old. It's specifically sort of like the transitory states that they kind of parallel. But what that means is that while Miquella doesn't really age, the only indicator of how old he actually is would be letting his hair grow out, which is one explanation for why he really, really lets the hair grow out. So I want to make sure that we're capturing that because this particular situation, his time at Castle Saul, seems to have been, at least, it wouldn't have been quite as late as this Moog one, but it would have been much later than the statues we see at the Howling Tree, which were the other refs we have, the only other refs we have, other than, I guess, assuming the screenshot character from the DLC preview is Miquella, which seems the most likely candidate, mainly because of the hair, the fact that Torin has a Miquella connection, and the outfit matches. But it is still a reverse view, and they're all family members, so who knows. But if that is Miquella, then we've got that reference too. But actual reference images for Miquella are sparse. But we can sort of gauge the hair length. But it also means that the hair is significant, and I want to make sure that the time at Castle Saul, when it would have been fairly long, maybe not quite as long as in the Moog moment, but fairly long, we want to capture that. So I was just like loose sketching it in. We'll see how much we braid, how much we let just kind of like loose flutter in that silhouette. But now that we're going for Miquella being like a singular imposing silhouette, and this blade being the other part of that, so like the contrast to it, it means that I don't mind obscuring the details of the silhouette with the hair nearly so much. I'm fine with that. Before I was like, the pose was supposed to be more dynamic, and then the hair would just like bury the silhouette of it, which was not great. And then the only other thing, while we're on recap mode, here I'll make that faint, more like really faint. Is we did do like maybe just hints of background stuff. Oops, no, that's not really what I wanted the background one to be a little clearer. Because there's is it Commander O'Neill or Niall? One of those two. Or Commando Niall and Neil. No, it's O'Neill is in the Scarlet Rot land, and Niall is in Castle Saul. This is in Castle Saul, so that'd be Niall. It makes sense that he would also be looking over, but I want him like vertically placed lower than Miquella, even though he's smaller. But lower in the scene, which this intense perspective allows us to do, with them both bending over. Just for hierarchy, because Miquella would be the one in charge, assuming they're connected, which seems extremely likely, in my mind at least. But he would, again, just be very faint silhouette, and then we might have like a window in the background if we want to, but I don't know if that would be overly distracting. So I just threw them in there as like super faint hints. Woo, voice crack. Yeah, gotta drink some water. Sorry with that. But just some super faint hints, maybe some things either to fill the scene, help redirect the viewer, again, upwards, but I really want the view to be on this, so we may end up having to exaggerate that part even more. But I am very happy with where we're leaving off on this. I'm gonna leave another note on the hair that's like, maybe chill on the braids. I love how bonkers this makes my handwriting. This particular brush, or pen in particular. I don't even necessarily want it to be parallel. But I like the parallel that like the leg and the arm have, which will also translate somewhat with the cloak. We're going to have some really foreshortened like folds here, which will make some fun fabric stuff happening. We'll see. None of that should be on the hair layer, though. I mean, that part should. This part. Maybe considering arcing it up even just a little more. No, it wasn't Radigan. It's stinking Godwin. Godfrey? No, not Godfrey. Not Godric. Godwin. Well, in any case. Let's see. The scribe here. Braid above, and that's also a little crown thing too. So a wet above braid, not braid. Oh, the braid is like somewhat contained. The actual silhouette is not the braid. Anyway, okay, left some notes. We'll see if I can even read those tomorrow or whenever we come back to this. And yeah, thank y'all for sticking around despite an extremely quiet stream. I'll leave a note in the VOD to catch the last 20 minutes if you want an audio recap. Sorry again about all that. And hopefully we'll see y'all next time. Again, my goal for this month, not necessarily to have it done, but I want to get the line work done, and I want to have the base level flat in. That is my goal for this month, because that is easy to pick up on next time. That's the part that I love. So if we can get to that point, and not like rushed, like the first time we did this, we rushed it because I was just trying to hit a milestone, and the piece was such a mess that it was bad. I don't, unlike all the previous times, I'm actually like enjoying this one. Only potential issues like overall composition. Some of that could be resolved by just trimming the top off. Actually, probably a thing I should consider anyway. I'll make a note. Trim top of canvas off. Better position. It is. Better for the rule of thirds with the spike. It also would help with the rule of thirds on the face a little bit. The face is not the worst. But it would improve it. It'd bring the focal point better. We could add a lot of shadow over here, bring the view like intense. I don't know. It's something to consider. I don't want to do it tonight because it feels like it'd be a brash decision. Sorry about that, Thunk. And brash decisions right at the end of stream potentially create messes that you have to fix at the end of stream. I don't want to do that. So we'll look at that again next time. Until then, I hope you all have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, night, 3 a.m., whenever it may be where you're at. And wherever you may be, I hope it's good. And I hope that I'll catch y'all on the flip side. Have a good one.